Having gone over the best CPUs, cases, some motherboards, and soon coolers, we're now looking at the best GTX 1080 Ti's of the year. Because this is such an expensive purchase, and we looked at quite a few of them, we thought we'd round it all up in one video. Contrary to popular belief, the model of cooler does actually matter for video cards. We'll be going through thermal and noise data for the 1080 Ti's we've tested, including MOSFET, VRAM, and GPU temperatures, noise normalized performance at 40 dBA, and the PCB and VRM quality. As always with these guides, you can find links to all the products discussed in the description below, along with their original reviews. Before getting to that, this content is brought to you by the Thermaltake Flow RGB closed loop liquid cooler, which is a 360mm radiator plus 3 120 fans that are RGB illuminated, the Thermaltake Rain fans at that. This is a 4.5 gen Asetek pump, which is one of the faster pumps. You can learn more at the link in the description below. With video cards, if you're just looking at gaming benchmarks, it's pretty easy to basically see all the 1080 Ti's or 1070s or 580s and come to a conclusion of they're all the same. But the thing is, once you look beyond the gaming performance and the clock performance, basically you get into territory of how granular do you want to be on thermals and on noise, how much do you care about noise normalized performance, VRM quality, things like that. So we've got a roundup for you of all the cards we've tested, at least the ones that deserve to be included in the roundup. And the quick sort of note here, gaming performance between these is all the same. It's within a couple FPS. So the only reason that ever changes is overclocking. And overclocking on 1080 Ti's and on Pascal in general is more a function of silicon quality per chip, which is nearly random, than it is of the PCB or the VRM or anything like that, until you get into heavier overclocking where you're doing exotic cooling, or maybe you go with liquid and you need the VRM thermal headroom. So we'll be focused on the cooler quality PCB and VRM design, and clocks are sort of a secondary function of all of those, because basically with Pascal, the cooler you keep it, the better the clock will be. So we can just kind of figure that out by looking at the thermal performance, which makes it easy. The first award is the most important and is assigned for the best overall combination of thermal and noise performance. So basically the best overall 1080 Ti, sort of ignoring price, for the most part. Across all tested thermal categories, that'd be VRAM, MOSFET, GPU diode temperatures, we found the ASUS Strix 1080 Ti to be the most consistent and impressive in its thermal performance. The Strix keeps its core temperature low, but also manages to keep VRAM and VRM thermals equally and proportionally low to the core. This can't be said for a lot of the competing coolers. A lot of this comes down to mounting plates for the heatsink, and the fact that ASUS is actually leveraging the mass of its 2.5 slot fin stack, and fin design, pitch, and density also all permit good airflow through the sink, and the shroud doesn't trap air inside of the cooler either, so these are all good things. At $800, it's sort of the limit of what we're willing to spend on a 1080 Ti, and it's one of the more expensive ones, so you really have to care about noise normalized performance, keeping the lowest thermals possible for the lowest noise possible across all components, things like that. Obviously, liquid potentially gets better there too. The only category where the Strix cooler really loses some ground is that of size, but size and cooling to noise performance are largely mutually exclusive. At 2.5 slots, some users may instead require a 2-slot card to better accommodate build needs. For a single card build though, this generally isn't a concern. We want to give an honorable mention to MSI and the 1080 Ti Gaming X here. It's a little bit cheaper, so that helps out. The Twin Frozer cooler remains the most effective dual fan solution we've tested this year. It's able to leverage its larger fans to spin at lower, quieter RPMs than some of its competition, and the Twin Frozer design isn't the best by raw numbers, but it has an excellent mix of noise to cooling performance and manages this at a lower price than some of the flat-out best coolers, like the Strix. That price reduction matters, and to offer a competitive cooler at a lower price, MSI gets an honorable mention, even if it's not outright the best. We are interested to see how the company improves its dual fan design for 2018, if at all, now that it's venturing into 3-fan designs. This next category, best for modding, could also be taken to mean most room for improvement. The MSI GTX 1080 Ti Armor was originally a $700 bottom-of-the-barrel 1080 Ti, rivaling the reference card in price, and it was for good reason. We found the stock cooler to be abysmal, and its performance thermally was just not good. It wasn't good acoustically either. We also noted that the cooler was highly similar, though not entirely the same, as the coolers that MSI uses on the 1070 Armor cards. The upshot of this, though, is that you can get a very cheap and very good PCB and VRM for entry-level 1080 Ti prices. The best kept secret of the 1080 Ti's is that the 1080 Ti Armor, for all of its faults, and there are many, actually has the Gaming X PCB, which is one of the better ones. The Gaming X PCB uses 16 of the 5018 SGs hooked up to 8 inductors controlled by 8 driver ICs and gives an 8-phase VRM with 4 MOSFETs per phase. The Fairchild dual FET packages contain both the high side and low side FETs, and this overbuilt VRM outputs just 15 watts of heat under a typical 250 amp load, or 40 watts of heat under a 400 amp overclock. That's assuming 125 Celsius on the components for 300 kilohertz for the switching frequency. If you're hoping to buy a 1080 Ti and convert it into a liquid-cooled card, something that we tested with this very card, this is one of the best options. You're discarding the cooler anyway at that point, so there's no point in spending on a big one. Get a cheaper cooler, like the one on the Armor, and a good PCB for the baseline. In our testing with a closed-loop liquid cooler, the Armor PCB became one of the best cards on our thermal charts, and that is while retaining one of the better PCBs and one of the lower prices. You definitely wouldn't want this thing with its stock cooler, but it's primed for modding. Our next category is for best technology, which is assigned to the card that made the biggest contribution to the underlying tech in an AIB partner card for 2017. This one goes to the EVGA ICX cards, responsible for implementing NTC thermistors across the entire PCB, improving VRM cooling by increasing baseplate surface area, and significantly overhauling ACX after the Great Thermal Pad incident of 2016. Video cards don't change much generationally, so to see a company move to install thermistors on critical non-GPU components is big. It may not seem like a big deal to the average user, but if you think about it from a testing perspective, ICX gives us new tools to improve thermal testing accuracy of aftermarket coolers, water cooling solutions, and blocks, and validate our own external case temperature measurements of VRMs with our thermocouples. ICX has become a tool for benchmarking, as it's easy to measure temperatures of components that would usually go unrecognized. This also, as far as the consumer is concerned, this comes at a time when other manufacturers have dropped the ball on VRM thermals, like Zotac with the Amp Extreme and its poor thermal performance when compared to the sheer mass of its own cooler. As GPUs continue to reduce power consumption and cards get smaller, temperatures of other components outside the GPU core become increasingly relevant. This is because you can run lower fan speeds because the core doesn't need as much cooling, but now your VRM is going to get a bit warmer. ICX complements what we do with our own thermocouples well, and has become an important tool for testing other cooler designs, and is one of the biggest technological changes in coolers for this year. Our next award is for best value. Thus far, other than the Armor, a lot of these cards have been in the $750 to $800 range. You definitely don't need a card that expensive to get the same frame rates, and the acoustic or thermal performance isn't universally important to people, so we were split between the 1080 Ti SC Black and the 1080 Ti Duke from MSI. Given the current pricing of the market, the MSI Duke is winning. This card ranges from $735 to $750 depending on retailer rebates and sales, and ends up priced about where the Gaming X used to be before the mining craziness, but we have to work with it. The SC Black used to be closer to $720, but is unfortunately out of stock at that price or boosted to $750 now, making the Duke a bit cheaper, and for pure value, we'd recommend considering the MSI card. On the opposite end of the value argument, we also wanted to point out the best PCB and VRM, and to quote BuildZoid, the most ridiculous overkill PCB and VRM. This isn't something that 99% of users will ever need, but if you're going for heavy overclocking or just like looking at high-end stuff, the Galax GTX 1080 Ti HOF video card is among the top tier cards. BuildZoid of Actually Hardcore Overclocking did an analysis on this card and believes it to be the best PCB of the 1080 Ti's. The Galax Hall of Fame V-Core VRM is a 16-phase VRM, which, again, to quote BuildZoid, is ridiculous and absolutely insane. The Galax HOF uses an IR3595 voltage controller in 8-phase mode, using a doubling scheme on the 16-phase setup for the card. The VRM ends up with 40 watts of heat dissipation at 400 amps, or 54 watts at 500 amps, both of which are reasonably controllable with targeted and active cooling. The Dumbest Trend Award, or as we've been calling it, the best dumbest trend, goes to gigantic heat sinks. In what can only be described as a measuring contest, some manufacturers have continued to increase the mass and physical size of their GPU coolers, often with minimal gain in thermal performance, in some cases being outperformed by 2-slot coolers. Even in noise normalized performance, not much of a gain. What's worse is a lot of the manufacturers are overlooking cooling basics with their massive coolers, like physically connecting hot VRM components to the oversized heatsink rather than letting them sit and bake underneath it. Sort of the entire point of a big cooler, really. Stretching into 3-slot designs with 3 pounds of metal doesn't make the cooler automatically good. It just means that it's big and oftentimes not at all worth the added cost to buy or manufacture. There are a lot of good 2.5 slot designs out there, like MSI's Twin Frozer and the ASUS Strix coolers, and cards like the Gigabyte Extreme or Zotac Extreme are larger than each of these, yet worse in some of the comparative thermal performance. This comes down to smarter design, as opposed to just using more metal for the sake of looking bigger. And as we go into the next year, hopefully the reliance on just loading a card with copper and aluminum to make it look impressive will die down a bit as on-card thermistors and things like that become more prevalent, because that means testing of non-GPU components will become more prevalent. And if it doesn't, we're still here and we'll still be doing it. So you can always check with us. Subscribe for more as always. That's the GPU list for 1080 Ti's. We have one of these coming for basically all the cards, more of an overall roundup of best in each category type of thing. So subscribe for that. Store.gamersnexus.net to pick up a shirt like this one or one of our stickers. And patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.